Venenos tus monólogos, tus discursos incoloros. No ves que no estamos solos, millones de polo a polo. Al son de un solo coro marcharemos con el tono, con la convicción que basta de robo. Tu estado de control, tu trono podrido de...
Welcome everyone to the session. So excited to be here in community with you all. My name is Rashi Jawade. My pronouns are she, her. I am joining today from Austin, Texas, which is the indigenous land of the Tonkawa, the Comanche, and the Lipan Apache. I am also the Chief Strategy Officer here at Embracing Equity, and all of my personal and professional experiences from being an attorney. I used to be an attorney in a past life. So from that to working in a large urban school district, to working in various national education reform organizations, they have all led me to this role of a lifetime where I am finally able to align my values with my actions in all aspects of my life. I actually found Embracing Equity as a participant and experienced firsthand the incredible healing, joy, and liberation of walking the talk of anti-racism. So my hope for our session today is to share this journey with you in the hopes that you might also join in it to move yourself and your organizations towards freedom and liberation. So with that, I'm going to pass it to my co-presenter, Sharon.
Thank you so much, Rashi. I'm so excited to get to co-present the session with you today. I'm Sharon Keiser, she, her, hers, zooming in from the ancestral lands of the Dakota and Ojibwe peoples in what is now known as Hudson, Wisconsin. I am the Chief Operating Officer here at Embracing Equity, which means I hold finance, people operations, and technology roles within our team. My why is that I've been that nonprofit leader with positional authority, flailing without the tools and mindsets to see, much less embody, embed, and evolve our shared work through a social justice and racial equity lens. Similar to Rashi, it was not until I participated in Embracing Equity and met Daisy, our visionary founder, that I realized just how much work I needed to do to be able to embrace equity from the inside out and really unleash new possibilities. In fact, even in preparing for this session, Daisy pushed me to think differently about how this community, all of us together, can ignite our imaginations and not get stuck in the what is, or as Lori said in our last session, our dark side of Mount Everest, but to really dream of what could be, to embody our shared values and champion anti-racism at work, in our communities, and in our schools. And what better way to get inspired than to hear the stories of the incredible leaders that will be joining us today as our panelists. And that means you too. As Jose mentioned in yesterday's session, leadership will emerge from the movement. The leadership is right here. So as we go, please add your thoughts and questions in the chat. We'll work to respond in real time or queue up your questions for the live Q&A in the second half of this session. So let's dive in. We'll kick things off with Rashi getting us grounded in the fundamentals of Embracing Equity's ecosystem approach. And then we'll all have the opportunity to really reflect on what we've heard, what feels actionable right now, and share our highlights in the chat. So without further ado, I will pass it over to Rashi.
Thank you, Sharon. So the title of this session is, what does it mean to be an anti-racist organization? And before we can talk about anti-racist organizations, let's take a minute to figure out, what do we mean by anti-racist, right? What does the term anti-racism actually mean? Anti-racism is not a destination. You don't arrive there and then you're done and now you're anti-racist for life, right? It's a journey. So as Ijeoma Olu says, the beauty of anti-racism is that you don't have to pretend to be free of racism to be an anti-racist. Anti-racism is the commitment to fight racism wherever you find it, including in yourself. and it's the only way forward. So when we speak about anti-racism, yes, it means to be against racism, right? Taking a stand against racism. We also mean working towards something we want to build, right? Anti-racism also means working towards building a liberated future, right? We are witnessing anti-racism being kind of spun into this monster, into this fear of the unknown, with like the anti-CRT movement and others. But what anti-racism is standing against racism and looking forward to what we build. As Jose asked us yesterday during his session, right? If we are unafraid, what does it mean to live into that message, right? And so Robin D.G. Kelly says, without new visions, we don't know what to build, only what to knock down. We not only end up confused, rudderless, and cynical, but we forget that making a revolution is not a series of clever maneuvers and tactics, but a process that can and must transform us. So our goal today is to learn and think through what a more liberated future looks like for us and for our organization. So at Embracing Equity, we have a three-pronged ecosystem approach to transforming organizations to becoming more anti-racist and more liberated, right? This starts with, the first is the individual and the personal. So at the end of the day, organizations are made up of people, right? We need to ensure that we, the people within our organizations and within our teams, are equipped to understand race and racism, talk about it, and know what to do when faced with it, right? Understanding the root causes of inequity and our own internalized biases requires deep and ongoing internal work. The second prong of our ecosystem approach, which is around interpersonal actions, and in organizations, that's culture and climate. So in addition to the individual work, we also need interpersonal actions, right? No organizational change will happen without the collective. So teams must engage in the challenging work of building shared racial literacy and sharpening our analytical lens, right? It requires a culture of psychological and material safety for brave, anti-racist truth-telling and action. And then the third part, which is last but certainly not the least, we also need institutional transformation through systems and structures, right? This is what's written down in the handbook. These are our organizational policies and procedures. And they're oftentimes seen as objective or neutral, right? But again, they were created and are upheld by people who have our own biases, right? We all have biases. And if we are actively creating these policies and procedures and upholding them, then those affect how they're being experienced. So policies and procedures also at times are adopted through a routine process, right? Without question or interrogation, you redraft them up, you get your board to approve it, and then that's it. But we need to ensure that they are actually keeping anti-racism, equity, inclusion at the forefront, right? They're being centered in their creation. And we don't stop there, right? We also need to make sure that they're also being experienced that way by the people within our organization. We want to be checking in to make sure that they're being lived out in the day-to-day.
Yes, thank you, Rashi. I have lived that, and what you're saying reminds me of one of the really tough lessons that I keep having to learn over and over again. I have this tendency to want to go off in a corner and spend a bunch of time writing policies and procedures with all the best practices and bring them back, and they'll be adopted and it will be so great. But actually, that the policies and procedures themselves simply don't matter at all unless they are transparent, co-created, motivating, and integrated with the experiences of the whole team in ways that build trust, accountability, and belonging. But how do we actually do that? So maybe we can take a couple of minutes and reflect on the ecosystem approach. And we've thrown in the chat here a reflection worksheet that everyone can take a couple of minutes and focus in. There's a lot of pieces that Rashi just talked about: individual and personal learning, culture and climate, systems and structures. Focus in on just one of those areas and try and think about what is relevant to you right now, and what can you really take action on. And so we're going to play a little bit of music. And as the song winds down, please feel free to start sharing your highlights in the chat. And so we'll see you in a couple minutes. And DJ Carly's going to cue that music for us. Wow, thank you, DJ Carly, for that perfect reflection song. Really appreciate that. And now everyone can kind of wrap up their thoughts and maybe start sharing in the chat. What are the things that you're noticing that you can take action on right away? I know one of the things I appreciate about this worksheet that our team put together under culture and climate is, what are the unspoken beliefs, values, and expectations within my organization? That's something that our team at Embracing Equity has been really focused on for the last year as we've been growing our team and really expanding, our reach. And so we really realized we have this incredible culture, this incredible magic that happens when our team comes together. And we need to memorialize that and figure out how we can, make sure that we're evolving and bringing new folks in through our hiring process and our onboarding process, in order to make those unspoken things spoken and transparent. And it's a big lift, and it's exciting and fun, and we make mistakes along the way and continue to evolve that over time. So who's going to be brave and share something in the chat for us? All right, thinking about how to include staff members in the decision-making process. That is huge. Oh, thinking about your personal why. This work is pivotal to ensuring that no child has to heal from their experiences at school. We each deserve to embody and be present as our whole selves. Absolutely. Anyone else feeling brave and want to share a little bit what you're thinking? Jennifer, my why is because I have been marginalized and I want to make sure that doesn't keep happening to students. Break the cycle, absolutely, +1. Thinking about how Black women are for hard work, but not for equitable pay. Absolutely, pay inequities is an incredible challenge that we all face, and we all have a role in changing over time. Actually changing right now, not over time. Thinking of the parent community and how we can include without using tokenism. Awesome. Well, keep these thoughts bubbling up and add questions throughout the session, as we mentioned. But now we get to jump into the really fun part, the panelists. So Rashi, take it away.
Yes, I am so excited. Excited, everybody. Get excited with me. I am so excited and honored to be able to share this virtual stage with our 4 amazing panelists. All 4 of these ladies are rock stars. Plus, Embracing Equity and I have personally had the privilege of partnering with each one of them over the past couple of years. So these leaders are actively striving to create and improve anti-racist practices within their organizations. And they're doing so at all 3 of the levels we discussed, right? The individual, the interpersonal, and the institutional levels, to champion equitable outcomes for their teams and the communities they serve. So each of our panelists will share with us their leadership stories and how their organizations are striving to be anti-racist, how they're leading their organizations in striving to be anti-racist. And after they share their stories, we will open the floor up for your questions. And Sharon's going to be my partner on this and help capture some of the questions you all are sharing in the chat. So don't feel like you have to wait. You can start populating your questions in the chat, keep it interactive, keep your comments coming. And we will figure out the moderation on our end. So with that being said, I would love if our panelists first shared with us a little bit about who they are. Tell us who you are, your role at your organization. Why are you engaging in anti-racism? And Lisa, perhaps we can kick it off with you.
Yes, welcome everyone. It's so good to see so many of you all. My name is Lisa Berry. I am the head of school at Woodland Montessori here in Madison, Wisconsin. My reason for engaging in anti-racist is a way of life for me, and setting the intention to be anti-racist is having an open heart and mind when you show up in different spaces. It's also important to me that in our community that we have a huge disparity. We are one of the worst places for African-American children to attend school. We're worse than Mississippi. And I live by this motto because of that. If I can help one child through my anti-racist work, that child can change someone else. And it is my unapologetic hope that it would transform our community.
Awesome. Thank you, Lisa, for sharing. Heather, will you tell us about yourself?
Yeah, hi everyone. I am calling in from Los Angeles, California, where I've lived for the last 17 years or so. And I'll start just by sharing a little bit about who I view myself as, and then the work that I do. So I'm first and foremost a daughter, a sister, a twin sister. I have a twin brother, an auntie, and most importantly, a mom to my pit bull puppy, Loki, who you can't see because I have this background on, but he's a cutie. And by day, I am the Chief People Officer at New Schools Venture Fund. And for those of you who aren't familiar with New Schools, we're a national philanthropy, and we raise money from donors and invest those dollars into teams of educators and innovators. We invest in people and new ideas who have great potential for impact in innovative public schools, both public district and public charter, in learning solutions that reinvent student experiences, and organization that are advancing Black and Latino leadership in education, and in early stage ideas outside of our other investment areas. And even though I work in philanthropy now and work in the people world, I'm actually a school leader at heart. So I started as a teacher here in Los Angeles in the district, became an assistant principal and a principal, and then a chief learning officer, and spent about 15 years of my career, the first 15 years, in schools. And so when I came to New Schools in the philanthropic world, I bring sort of what it means to lead and teach in schools. And you know, at New Schools, when I first came, there was a good mix of like people who had come from consulting backgrounds and people who had come from schools. And you know, we love this professional development thing in schools, right? And so I'll get to talk a little bit more about the work we're doing at New Schools, but it was very important to me that if in the field we were seeking to disrupt traditional philanthropic ways of being, which include very little money going to people who are not white, then we had to do that internal work ourselves. And so started working with Embracing Equity, actually when I was a partner on the team investing in New Schools. And then when I became Chief People Officer, brought them to work with our internal staff. And we'll talk more about that in the panel, but that's a little bit about who I am.
Awesome. Thank you, Heather, for sharing. Anna, will you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Hey everyone, I'm Anna and my pronouns are she, her. And I actually have sort of two hats that I come today with wearing. One of them is as a Montessori guide of 18 years. I was working with the Ivy School here in Portland, Oregon, is a public charter Montessori school. I was the primary guide in their first year having a primary program. And I'm actually leaving that school to go on to do some leadership in a new school. But the other hat that I wear is that I am also the current board president of the local Montessori Training Center, Montessori Northwest, here located here in Portland, Oregon. So I come with those two experiences. And the reason that I engage in anti-bias work is actually because it is really directly related to my identity and the intersections that I carry. And my very existence is political. And I feel like instead of, now that I know and I'm deeply rooted in my identity, I'm doing some deep identity work. I am an international transracial adoptee, a woman of the global majority, and I have a lot of experience as a veteran teacher in the primary level, that I have access to opportunities that are directly prepared for me. And that is why I'm here, and to continue to unlearn and to relearn.
Thank you so much, Anna, for sharing that with us. Candice, will you share a little bit about yourself?
Sure. Thank you, Rashi. Hi, everyone. I'm Candice Yates here in Minnesota. I am the strategic leader of equity and quality supports at an early childhood nonprofit here in the Twin Cities Metro. We support early childhood educators, both family and licensed child care centers, in a variety of ways. My team specifically does on-site early childhood coaching to help our educators with quality and environment, and also our state's quality rating and improvement system called Parent Aware. And in the last couple of years, I've also taken on an additional role at our organization to help steer our internal commitment towards equity, diversity, and inclusion. And we got to a place where we realized as an organization, if our strategic goal is to prepare all children for kindergarten, then that means that we have to be an anti-racist organization, because our focus is every child, and we want every child to have a quality early childhood experience, both academically, socially, and emotionally, so that they can be prepared to enter the K-12 system. For me personally, I've also been an early childhood educator for many years before kind of moving into the administrative side, and also having my children go through their early years with me. I got to a place where I realized the impact of systemic racism on myself as an educator, on my own racial identity formation and my own socialization, and realized that, first of all, I have a lot of self-work to do. And as I began to do that work, the passion began to grow for wanting to bring others along, and realizing that this is a journey that we all have to go through individually and collectively in our work as educators if we're going to ensure our children's future. So it has been a joy for me. And just, I think somebody was just saying, Anna was saying, like the whole learning and unlearning, all of the things that have been packed into my toolbox that don't need to be there, taking those things out and replacing them with the proper tools and understanding of who I am, and being able to support others in that. So thank you.
Awesome. Yes, Candice, we have a bunch of early childhood educators on our team too. So you're getting some early childhood love in the chat as well. So I would love to hear from all of y'all, actually, how is your organization striving to be anti-racist? I know some of y'all talked about it a little bit in your intros, but would love to hear more about your organizations.
In our case, we have been really having intentional and meaningful conversations, meaning like we have set up a BIPOC affinity group. For the last 10 years, I have had a diversity and equity committee, and through that, it has taken off, where it's branched off into a parent empowerment group, where we have children and parents meet together and have all kinds of conversations and social experiences. But the children get to see in this school that's predominantly white, they get to see folks who look like them and have families that are doing things in the community that wouldn't be aware of if they didn't come together in this parent empowerment group. Also, we have set up last year 6 hours. Our staff is required to do anti-bias, anti-racist work, and through that, they also have a time to do it and get it done, and they're paid. And they also we pay for their training as well. So we're not just saying, here, do this work without putting the finances behind it, because that's really important too. Because we all know as teachers that we can overwork if that's allowed, or if not allowed, but if that's offered to us, because it's just naturally, I know me as a teacher, I would always go beyond the 8 hours. So we also, through our diversity and equity committee, we do ABAR book clubs. So they're ongoing all throughout the year, reading any of the current books. And out of that, I'm just finding that people are coming together in like these aha moments and these layers of unlearned or, things are just coming off. So we have worked really hard here at Woodland to do this work for the last 10 years, as we're a Montessori school. So I said, the environment has been prepared and is continually being prepared.
Yes, so many gems. So you all are actually creating in your budget and in your day-to-day 9 to 5, the time and space and resources for folks to do anti-racism work. And you're doing it not just at the systemic policy level, but you're creating opportunities for staff to do professional development around anti-racist mindsets and practices.
Absolutely. I just want to add that just recently I had a conversation with the board president, and they are now going to take a stand against microaggressions being spoken in this space. And they're going to come up with their own statement and their own, I'm not quite sure how it's going to roll out, but the fact that the board is going to be behind that type of work. This space has been here for 50 years, and there's been so much that we're unlearning and undoing.
Yes. Thank you for sharing, Lisa.
I can jump in and share a little bit about New School's journey. So I started to give some insight into who we are. We're a philanthropic organization. We've been around for almost 25 years. Next year is our 25th anniversary. And it was about 2015 when Stacy Childress, who is our current CEO, and Frances Massano, who's our president and incoming CEO, and first woman of color who will be CEO of New School's Venture Fund, said, we're actually going to start to disrupt what it means to be in philanthropy, and added a diverse leaders portfolio to our fund, which actually Embracing Equity, we help seed fund out of that portfolio. And that portfolio is meant to do two things. One is to support the catalyzation of more leaders of color in education and more teachers of color in education, and to fund organizations that do that, and to fund organizations like Embracing Equity who do the work to help leaders sustain in this work, because as we'll talk about today, the burnout is real, as it's so challenging to continue to do the work. And so that kicked off our journey. And the work that we're doing now is about making sure that internally what we're doing matches our external commitment to ensuring an organization where we are disrupting philanthropy. And so over the past couple of years, we've taken, I love the framework you've provided. I think it's one of the first times I've seen it that I'm like, yes, that's what we're doing. So we're on a pathway. But the first thing is about changing the mindset from, and a bunch of you are educators. So the analogy I'll use is when I was a teacher and a leader, people talked about doing PLCs. Like we do PLCs, we get together on Tuesdays and we do PLCs, when actually a professional learning community is something that you are, it's something that you're constantly examining. And DEI work to me is the same. You don't do DEI, and in many organizations, that is the approach. We do DEI, we come together, we do it, then we're done. So the first sort of approach we've taken is shifting a mindset from DEI is not something you do and then you're done with, which in many ways was fits and starts for us. We'd do some professional learning around it, but it was never embedded, to embracing an approach to DEI is about changing who you are and the way you examine the world and the way you examine your challenges. And so we've done that through, one, naming that, narrating that for folks. Here's what we're trying to do. I think two, through partnering with Embracing Equity. So Embracing Equity facilitates monthly affinity group spaces where the goal, depends what affinity group you're in. But for example, as a white woman, my affinity group really is looking at what are the ways we need to unpack how we're either perpetuating harm or changing the narrative of what it means to be a white ally in the work. Carly helps facilitate that in ways that I think has pushed my thinking. As someone who's been in the work for a long time, pushed my thinking in ways that haven't been pushed in a long time. And our Black affinity group, for example, focuses a lot on healing and what are the ways that we can continue to push the organization. And so that's on the personal. On the interpersonal, they're also helping us facilitate workshops between multiracial coalitions who are having conversations. And we also have done quite a bit of work naming and norming on what does it mean to approach challenges and to approach the work we're doing from an anti-racist lens and with equity at the center. And then finally, from the systems and structure level, the work is ongoing, because the work of dismantling racist and inequitable policies, like you can take a comb to every single HR policy that's ever existed and there is a problem with it. And so we've started by looking pretty large or broadly at what are the policies that are problematic, and immediately in the first year shifted our bereavement policy, for example, to be fully inclusive of any sort of family structure or dynamic, our leaves policies to be fully inclusive of any type of dynamic that might exist. And so that's one way. We've also totally revamped our hiring processes to really ensure we're bringing in incredible talent. And I'll end by saying, like, I could list 100 things we've done because, as I said, there's a lot that needs to shift. And I think the headline is what we've really tried to do is commit to an ever-going process of embedding this way of thinking into our day-to-day work. And so that has meant there's changes across the board in different places. And it also means that we recognize how far there is to go still. And I think that's the tension of this work and helping folks keep momentum, which I'm sure we'll talk about today.
Yes, I love that headline. It speaks to anti-racism being a journey, right? Like, you can celebrate how far you've come and still know that there is more ahead of you. So thank you for sharing, Heather. Anna, Candice, would you like to tell us a little bit about your orgs?
Yeah, I can go next. I really actually appreciated, Heather, something you mentioned that made me think, oh, I want to make sure to bring that up, because, the two organizations that I am with, they have a deep commitment to anti-bias, anti-racist work, but how they got there is really unique and kind of different. And so with the Ivy School, it's part of the charter, and it also took the head of school to make that part of the daily practice. So we had an equity committee. We participated in the leadership residency, and we were part of a virtual cohort. We met monthly. The affinity space was pretty radical for me as a woman of the global majority. To be in community with my head of school was profound, and it really amplified our team in that way. I also want to just point out too that part of my work at the school was really steeped in the curriculum. And so it was an opportunity to just a lot like the Nike slogan, just do it, like literally normalizing conversations around language for young children in my classroom, and also their adults, and providing space for children to be themselves and show up fully who they are. Now with Montessori Northwest, Montessori Northwest has been around for over 40 years, and they've done their homework. They've, as part of being board president, I've been able to be part of a process of really listening. And it was compassionate listening. And it was listening to the courageous people saying, hey, let's think about this. Let's do better. And we continue to listen and we continue to grow because that is the journey. And one example of that was as I took on the board president role, we had an ABAR committee and on the board, and I just kept bumping up against it. I wasn't sure, this didn't feel right to me. Whereas, anti-bias, anti-racist work really is the plate upon which everything that we're talking about today should be coming off of. And so that was the first thing I asked everyone as I had listening sessions with each board member. I learned personally that everyone is committed to some kind of work, whether they are new to the journey or they're really advanced and experienced and have been doing this for a long time. So my job now is to bring those players together and keep our goal centered around the mission, and also bringing that daily practice of equity forward in each of our roles and whatever policy, whatever comes up, however we can support the training center. That is what our role is. So I think, it's been an interesting journey, but we're doing it every day, a little bit every day.
Yes. Thank you so much.
Yeah, I'll share just a little bit about kind of in the early stages, I think for us, when we started to make an intentional effort in this area versus kind of the one-off activities here and there. We finally got to a place where our CEO realized, okay, we need to be very intentional with this work and provide some structure and some accountability around what we're doing. And one thing that became very clear to us was that our staff at large were in a place where they were ready to do this work. They were open to having conversations about racism. Some, not all, but quite a few of our staff were definitely willing to talk about their own racial identities and their own experiences, but our leadership wasn't that ready to do that. They weren't that comfortable. And so, like Heather mentioned, the professional learning communities, that is something that we adopted right away within our organization. And it started with our C-suite folks, our strategic leaders that are the ones that are, moving the strategic plan forward. And, typically in my past experience, and some of you all might be able to relate, typically in organizations, when an organization is choosing to do this work, a lot of times they start with their frontline or entry-level staff. But we recognize that, yes, our staff do need to do this work, but our leaders need to be out front. They need to be the ones committing to this work. They need to be the example. So we really took time. We slowed down and did a lot of work as leaders, even before we got into deep conversations about race or tackling any issues around systemic racism within our organization. We really rolled back and did a lot of work around who are we as leaders? What does it mean for me to commit to this work? What are the areas that I need to commit to learning about, educating myself on? Even how do I handle conflict? How do I handle having difficult conversations? Because if we're not comfortable doing any of those things, we're definitely not going to have a conversation about race. And so we really pulled back, and I was really nervous at first to do that. I didn't see the connection, but I did. And I didn't know if leaders would recognize the importance of not rushing to solve the problem, which is a byproduct of white supremacy culture, right? Like, we want to rush to fix, rush to do, but we had to really pull back and say, okay, we need to sit here for a while and get our leaders established and establish some accountability. So we've been, every month, our leaders have been meeting with me. I've been facilitating learning community spaces for them for 2 years now. And now that work has spread to more of our supervisory level and our managers within our organization. And the goal is to offer what we're doing in those spaces with all of our staff, but with the intention of having leaders lead out front and do the work first, so that as their staff go through the work, when they're in smaller group discussions or when they're having one-on-ones, they can talk about these things with their staff. You know, being the only person in the organization that is identified as championing this work is also my goal, to help develop leaders who can also do the work and support staff in doing it as well. It can't just be one person, right? So it has to be the leaders in the organization. Our leadership team, we also participated in the intentionally racially diverse cohort with Embracing Equity last winter. And I feel like it was perfect timing in terms of where we were going through the leadership residency with Embracing Equity. And that really almost, it wasn't a reset, but it was kind of like almost jumping off of a trampoline, right? So we were getting going in this work, we're kind of doing this steady bounce, and then we do the intentionally racially diverse cohort, and we come out of that with, we came out with 4 key critical action projects for our organization. One was creating racial affinity groups, starting with our BIPOC staff and our white presenting staff. Another one was really learning and embracing what it means to have a land acknowledgement for our organization, given where we are in the state of Minnesota, and educating our staff on what that means, and having that forward facing, not just for our staff, but for our public. And also working on some key things in terms of onboarding. I think someone mentioned it, as far as when you're bringing staff into the organization, we can't like go through all of our HR policies, but we can start here. We can start with, what are the things we want our new staff to learn? What do we want to gauge as far as our new staff's understanding on this anti-racist, anti-bias journey? And what do we want to equip them with right away? So we're in the process of formulating that. And then the last thing has also been around philanthropy, or within our organization, we call development. So our development team realized that the face of the majority of our donors and who we're reaching out to is primarily white. So how do we diversify? How do we reach out and partner with other organizations and communities to diversify our donor pool and also diversify who we're supporting? So I think the cohort was a key turning point for our organization, because Embracing Equity was really able to come in and say the hard things to our staff that they may have been hearing from me, but then hearing it again from an outside organization who's doing this work, it really helped it to sink in, like, okay, this isn't something that I'm observing subjectively, but this is also, as an organization, thought leaders who are in this organization saying, okay, here's how we want to support you all at Think Small. Think about these things. And they're like, oh, well, we've heard that before. Okay, maybe we really should think about this. Maybe we really should consider these things. So I'm excited, because it was rough going, but I think now we're not necessarily hitting our stride. We're not there yet, but we really are, like Anna said, we really are recognizing that, oh, like, this is the plate. Like, everything we do rests on the plate. Like, equity isn't over here, and then our strategic plan is over here, and then our performance appraisals are over here. No, everything sits on the equity plate. And the more we recognize that and do the work of saying, okay, how is this embedded? If it's not embedded, how do we embed it in all we do? And be real and talk about it and be honest about where we're at. And it took us a while to get there, to be honest, but I think we're finally there, and that's helping us to be intentional about doing the work.
Yes, thank you, Candace. One of the things that you said that we at Embracing Equity talk a lot about is we facilitated these learning spaces, I think, with all of your organizations. And one of the benefits of having somebody like Embracing Equity there is that we can say the things that maybe if you have a culture of niceness, or if you're a conflict averse organization, like, we can push the envelope in ways that may or may not be, your team may or may not be ready internally, right? So there's a benefit to that. I am also curious to hear from you all, again, since you've all partnered with Embracing Equity in different ways, what surprised you most about your work with Embracing Equity? Maybe can't, okay, but Lisa, you can kick it off.
I wouldn't say this, it was a surprise. I would just say Embracing Equity, when they came, they met each of us right where we were, and they took into account our different views, experiences, and styles. And that resource, and especially the audit, really was, again, what Candace said, things I had been saying, but you guys just could say it to them, and it was right there on the audit. So there was no way that we could deny that BIPOC people, like for instance, on our audit, 100% of our BIPOC people did not feel comfortable talking about race in this space. But yet we felt, some of the teachers feel like, well, we welcome Black people, BIPOC people in this community. I don't understand why they don't feel comfortable. It's that Midwestern nice. But when they saw it on the audit, and then we began to make goals from that audit, that resources has enhanced all of our understanding here.
Yes, thank you, Lisa.
I can share a couple pieces. One is, I just think it's incredible, the container that you all create in a virtual environment. And there are so many people I hear, I know many of you are not virtual or remote anymore, but there's a lot of organizations who need to do this work, and the excuse is that you can't do the work while in a remote environment. And I think that's not true. Right, so before it was cool, you all were doing it, right, Daisy? And so that's one thing I've just constantly been blown away and have learned a lot. And I think our staff members have learned a lot about how do you create virtual spaces that, as Lisa said, meet people where they are. The second thing I'll say is I really appreciate and have had experiences recently, even where this is not true, that you all think about how do humans need to fully show up in this work to be able to access. And so the work you do around wholeness, the work you do around healing with folks, the work you do around like letting go of shame or guilt that might be coming up for folks in the space, like all of that work is really important. And when it's not done is harmful to folks, can be harmful to folks, because we ask them to sit in spaces where they don't feel safe, where they're not asked to recognize what comes up for them. And I have been a part, like I said recently, of spaces where that's not true. And I think the juxtaposition of the two has been really present for me as we think about how do you bring people along, because people are on a journey. And so I think those two things have been particularly important and surprising to me in our work with y'all.
Yes, we create a lot of time and space, both in our planning and in the actual sessions themselves, around kind of setting the container and exactly what you were sharing, creating the space for all of us to show up authentically whole.
Yeah, you know, the thing that surprised me the most about this journey was how personal it became. As I shared earlier, I am an international transracial adoptee, and I've known this my whole life. But to really digest, with the help of my coaching sessions with Dr. Evans, the radical impact that has had on the lenses, like the literal lenses of my life, and the transformational process that I have gone through in the last 2 years in conjunction with the work that I've been doing with Embracing Equity has really been, that's been the biggest surprise to me, is that not only did I have this deep identity work going on, but also that out of that deep identity work became this opportunities just for stepping into myself unapologetically so. And what that meant is to be open to possibilities of leadership. For example, that is literally the time that I became the board president for Montessori Northwest. So recognizing that I have a seat at the table and I actually deserve to be there, and embracing myself, all the things that you just shared about the container, the support, the transformation became not about checking boxes, not about becoming an anti-racist organization, because it's a step. This journey is one step at a time. And I've been part of that. So yeah.
Yes.
I know, I'm like this. I was just gonna say the same thing, Rashi. Yes, okay. I'm like everything they said. One thing that came to my mind was early on when we were spending time together as a cohort, and we split off into our affinity spaces and having discussion. I just had this moment where I really realized, like, there is this amazing group of individuals that understands, like they understand exactly what I'm experiencing. They understand what's happening in my organization, even if they didn't work in a nonprofit. Like there were a variety of individuals with different backgrounds, but having a community of people that I knew understood. And so when I asked questions, or even if I made a mistake or said something wrong or whatever, like I just knew that, okay, they get it. They're there. They're going to hold me up. They're going to support me. And then too, I think looking back over the year and just like realizing how much work we did throughout the residency, like blew my mind. Because when you're in it, when you're doing it, you're there, right? It's day to day. Plus, if you're like me and you have another job, right, different responsibilities, like you're juggling all these things. And there were times where I felt discouraged. There were times where I was like, well, I don't know if this is sinking in. I don't know if like people are getting it. It doesn't seem like people really want to do this. And then like, I'd look up and like, oh, you're doing it. Oh, you're having the conversation with your team, like, oh, you've taken this resource and like you're expanding on it and you're having these conversations. So I think to look up at the end of the year, when we had our performance appraisals, and I was just sitting across from my who I report to, and it just like hit me like all of the support, all of the work, all of the effort that had been put in over the past 12 plus months, like there's fruit there, right? There were things that actually I could put my finger on and be proud of that, right? Be proud of that and take that and keep moving forward, and also being encouraged, like embracing equity. The residency came at the perfect time for me because I was very new to my role. And it really helped me to step into that work as, like Anna said, as me, right? Like I show up, I'm like, this is what y'all gonna get. Like, you're gonna get me. this is me. This is what you're gonna get. This is how the conversation is gonna go. Like, this is the language I speak, and not feeling like I call it shapeshift, not feeling like I have to shapeshift, right? In any spaces or for anybody. And I could do that because I knew that I had the support of this amazing community and these leaders that understood. And that would be like, girl, you better show up as you, like when you go in that space, like, no, you say it like this, say it like you mean it, walk in your truth. Like, and so that was a big thing for me. I'm a very relationship based person in the first place. So having the relationships, having the people that I knew were there watching either directly or indirectly, like really, really helped me to keep going and to push and to disagree and to call it out, call out what I see, and call a thing when I might have been the only person in the room doing that, knowing that like it was for this beautiful purpose of leading my organization towards change. And so yeah, I wouldn't, like y'all said, I wouldn't call it a surprise, more like a gift. Like these are all the gifts that we received as a part of our work with embracing equity.
Oh, thank you all. We love giving these gifts. Christmas for everyone all the time, gifts. we got a question from the audience that where they're asking, each of you are in positions with decision-making authority and influence within your organizations, like culture, climate, systems, and structures, right? But what is your advice for folks that want change but don't currently have decision-making power or don't sit in seats that have decision-making power?
I'll chime in. I think if your organization is in a place where if you've heard some language around anti-racism, anti-bias, if you've heard things from leadership mentioning, right, that they want to, one of the things I heard a lot was, mentioning that we want to look at this work through an equity lens. Or if you're hearing some of the language, then I think maybe that's an opportunity for you as a leader to then follow up on that language, right? So this is what I heard. What does that mean? I saw this, or when we were in the meeting, I heard you mention this. Can you tell me more about that? Okay. And take that as an opportunity to expound on the response. So if it's like, yes, we do want to, look at this through an equity lens, or we do recognize that we want to figure out how to embed this, or, we're looking for ways to diversify, or we know our environment needs to be more inclusive. Okay, great. What's your plan? Right? So like, what is your plan with that? And then, if they don't have a plan, or if they're thinking of a plan, it's a great way to introduce, and work with embracing equity, or whatever you may have that you've been thinking about or preparing, as a way to say, okay, since I heard you say this, because then it gives them an opportunity to be accountable for what they said, instead of, here's what I think you should do. Well, you're telling me this is what you want to do. Now, if they're not saying it at all, right? If they're not saying it, or you're not hearing it, then there may be opportunity to find a smaller group of individuals who are willing. And Dr. Evans, you have to remind me of what your phrase is for that when you're saying, go find your, and I'm drawing a blank, but it's, go find your people, right? Go find your people. It may not be the top leaders. It may not be everybody with decision-making authority, but go find your people first and start there, and like create that snowball effect within your organization.
Yes.
Thanks, Carly.
You got it.
I was just going to add that, when I started this process, like I did not consider myself a leader. And so I think just asking the questions and I guess, Candace, as you mentioned, like start listening to the language. Who can I go talk to? That's what I started doing. And then I started asking myself those questions, of course, too. And so the leadership part became sort of a twofold journey. Like I didn't recognize myself as a leader at first. And then all of a sudden, oh yeah, maybe I am. Maybe I do have that. And we work together to continue the work.
Yes, I mean, this also is reminding me of what Jose Wilson said during his session, where leadership will emerge from the movement, right? So even if you don't hold decision-making authority, the more you do your own anti-racism work, the more you are on your own anti-racist journey, you will find that leadership within you, and that will take different forms depending on what is needed, but you have it in you to do this work, even if you don't sit in a position that you think is decision-making authority. Heather, Lisa, did you have anything you wanted to share?
I was thinking about what Candace was sharing about the building upon building. In our case, in our organization, with some of those questions that folks have and they don't have a voice, a lot of times in our affinity book clubs, they get some of those answers and questions, or they can share there. Or even what I do is building upon building is the person who's leading the book club, I'll say, who do you notice in that group that could lead the next book club? So that, we're also they're not in a leadership role, but they're able to express their affinity work that they're doing. So I think, building upon building, it doesn't necessarily mean that they would have to be a leader, but they can have leadership in different ways.
Yes. So I am also wondering, so we've learned kind of how difficult this work is, right? Both personally and professionally. Can you all share with us potentially a hard moment or a time where you felt like you wanted to give up or maybe even did? And what came of that, right? How you got remotivated, maybe.
That is a loaded question. I can't tell you in the 10 years of being in this space that I wanted to give up and didn't know that this end of being the head of school was going to happen. I started out as a sub here at Woodland, and many times, and being the first Black teacher that stayed. That's the difference. We had teachers who came, but they didn't stay. And so my go-to was, why am I doing this work? So I think we did that in our affinity groups today. Like, what is your why? So you have to have a why. So on those moments, that's what remotivated me, is my why. And so my why was for the children and wanting to make this community better. Because not me singly, but me just staying consistently doing the work. So I would say in those hard moments, have a why. That's what we just built with each of our teaching teams, is each of them, you on those hard moments, because they'll come, not just in your A-bar work, but just with children and families in general. What is your why in staying and doing this work, whether it's teaching or any other thing that you're doing?
I can answer and combine the mistake question because they're sort of one and the same. For an example that's in my head, but we, you know, I think at New Schools we've been on a really good path. It feels like we've been moving the bar, and I would say like 2 years ago there was a lot of conversation around like, are we committed to this work? And that conversation is gone. And now I think some of what we wrestle with is like, are we going too fast or too slow? Like, how do we know we're on the right path? And we had a situation a couple months ago where we had an external facilitator, not embracing equity, come to do some professional, come to report out on something with the staff. And I saw the train wreck coming. Like, I saw that the facilitation wasn't going to go well. I saw that the way that some of the information had been wrapped up was going to potentially be hard for folks. And it was one of those moments where, and a lot of our staff members were supporting leading on the work. So it was one of those moments where I had to decide, do I step in and like there's ramifications from stepping in and saying, this can't go this way? Do I let it happen and know it's going to be horrible and we're going to have something to clean up? It's my direct report who leads the work. And so I let it happen, which we could argue is a mistake or not. I think there was trade-offs to that decision. And it was really hard for staff. Like, it was a very hard moment where they were not held safe in a space. And that could have derailed our work. It could have totally 100% derailed our work. And I think instead what we did is we regrouped. We used it as an opportunity to turn over the perfectionist narrative. So like, part of what people were experiencing was like, this wasn't the way it should have gone. And it's like, sometimes that happens. And in our very next team meeting, we redid the session internally with our staff rather than having the external, and we used everything we know from embracing equity. And we were able to turn the page. And I think, so the lessons there, you know, there are moments where I still think it was the right decision not to step in. Like, stepping in would have caused more harm in a lot of ways. And it was a moment to model mistakes are okay. We're not always going to get it right. And we have the knowledge and information ourselves to be on this journey together. And so let's go there. And it was a hard week. There was a couple moments where I was Like, I'm not sure I can get back up in front of staff and be like, that was really hard, but let's try again. And I did it anyways. And I think that's a theme in my own leadership, is there's been lots of moments where I'm not sure about my ability. I'm not sure that I'm the right person. I'm not sure that it's the right path, and we have to do it anyways. And so it was a hard moment that we've come back from.
Yeah,
oh, sorry, Sharon, go ahead.
I was just going to add, thank you so much for sharing that, Heather, and for modeling the vulnerability it takes to talk about mistakes openly. That's something our team at Embracing Equity, only just recently, I mean, maybe within the last year, we've implemented new norms around every team meeting. We each name a mistake that we've made. And when we first started doing this, it was terrifying. I mean, for me personally, I was like, wait, what? We're going to every single team meeting, we're going to admit a mistake? Like, we don't make mistakes. But it's been incredible because it has now become really normalized within our organization, and we can lift up mistakes, and we can lift them up even in the moment, not waiting until the team meeting, and talk through, hey, how do we transform this into something that we are actively learning from, just like you did in like recreating that workshop. I love that you took that on to recreate that yourself. And it is scary, and especially for folks who might be shy or introverted or whatever, those are real, and also they can be excuses, and we can all name our mistakes when they're happening. And really work to learn from those things. Thanks for sharing that, Heather.
I would love to hear from you all. What does learning and unlearning look like at your organizations?
Well, I can just jump right in and kick this off. I think recognizing that we don't know the answers right away. It's letting go of that perfectionism, which is a tenet of white supremacy culture, and reckoning with it. We don't know the answer, but we're going to find it together. And we may have made some missteps, but we're going to figure it out. And sometimes that is messy. I saw a comment in the chat about messy, and I think it is messy, and we might not always know. One of the things I thought of for the last question I wanted to just add to this, actually fits right in, is that I was a teacher, right, for 18 years, a Montessori teacher, and my first year with Ivy School, it was all virtual. And one of my students unmutes himself and says, "Miss Anna, when are we going to talk about slavery?" I wasn't prepared for that question, right? Like, this is what I mean. We don't know. We might not know the answer right away. And the work is to do the work and to know that we're going to get questions like that. We might not know the answer, but to be able to go back and say, here's what I found out. Here's what we're going to do together.
Thank you, Anna.
Rashi, can you say the question one more time? It's like I was listening and thinking.
I know it's been a lot of like fast and furious questions. We're getting a lot of questions, amazing ones. It's been a little difficult keeping up, but we're trying our best. What does learning and unlearning look like at your organization?
Okay. It's things were coming to my mind, but I was really trying to focus and listen, and so then all of that disappeared. But two things that I thought about. One is slowing down, and I think that is that whole product of perfectionism, and like when you're on a team of people who are uncomfortable with the unknown, and can be a little bit uncomfortable with like not having an answer, you have to work to slow down, because the individuals will just want to move to fix it right away. And a lot of times wanting to move to fix it and move to action right away can be harmful. We can overlook people, we can overlook important steps. And so really having those conversations about like slowing down. And then for our team specifically, when we were in the early parts of our learning communities, like really intentionally learning about white supremacy culture and dominating behavior, and like, what does that look like in the workplace? How does that show up? And having conversations and saying, okay, in this space, you know, we're going to not record, we're going to name actual examples of how this is showing up in our work environment, in our interactions with each other, in our leadership of staff, so that it could become real. And not so that people could feel guilty or anything, but so that it was real, so that people can see like, oh, yeah, we do worship the written word here. Like, yep, perfectionism is like real, you know. And we coupled that with some like non-anti-racist specific works also, I think, to kind of help it to land a little softer as well. We used Brene Brown's work too, so coupling it together. But actually remarkable, a lot of it really does point to white supremacy culture. So but it helped them kind of swallow the information a little bit easier and recognize that like, oh yep, my leadership style is this and this, and I can get in the tendency of exhibiting behaviors within white supremacy culture. Okay, now let's talk about what's the antidote to that? Like, what can we do instead? And like really slowing down within our organization. So that meant that people had to learn first how things were bubbling up in them, what their behavior looked like, how was it impacting other people, and then they had to unlearn it. And then they also had to learn how to change their behavior. Okay, so we had to give new language, new vocabulary, new ways of interacting, new ways of resolving conflict. So one by one, right? It didn't happen like in a month. Like, this is 2 years of probably just talking about how can we change how we have difficult conversations with staff. Let's unpack that. Let's unlearn that. Now let's give you some language and some tips and some tools that you can now have a productive, affirming conversation with your staff. So, and now then it's like the process starts over with a different element or aspect of our work. Okay, what do we need to unlearn here? Why do we need to unlearn it? Why is it harmful? What are we hoping? What are we really trying to do? Okay, so now what do we need to learn in order to be able to do that and see the outcome that we want?
Yes. I mean, what Sharon was sharing earlier is kind of how we're also doing the unlearning, right? Because we're, as Carly put in the chat, we're all a team of recovering perfectionists, and we're always trying to chase perfection. And so we have had to build in some of these systems and structures in our ways of working, so that we're not defaulting to, you know, how we've been operating, and so that we are unlearning some of these patterns of behavior and kind of relearning new ways of being, both like doing the work, being in relationship, our, you know, our outlook on conflict, our outlook on mistakes, all of those things. Yes.
We've been developing folks around liberatory design and liberatory design mindsets, which is, I think, a way of looking differently at challenges. And I'll just share that I think the one behavior that I have seen interrupting as being pretty impactful in what it means to like sort of create some new learning opportunities for folks is binary thinking. And I see it everywhere. Like, it's either this or it's this. I'm always like, but what about this? What about this middle? Or what about this other way? And, you know, it's natural. It comes from our perspective and our experiences, but it's pervasive. And I think helping, what liberatory design does is really helps people sit in an empathy seat, which I think is necessary for new learning and for new ways of thinking about things. And so we've seen some interesting, I think, shifts and pivots to our work coming from that. One quick example I'll share is we had this Amex policy that so a credit card policy for staff that really, I think, bias towards folks who have disposable income. And 2 or 3 people brought it up to our finance team, and the initial binary was like, well, there's no other way to do it. Like, that's the best way. And through developing the finance team on a liberatory design mindset, they actually have come up with an entirely different policy that 6 months ago, they were like, there's no other way. Like, that's the only way we can do it, which, you know, we see come up, I think, a lot in finance and in HR. And so I think it's been, and they've led the whole staff through an empathy process to understand where the pain points were. And so that I think has been one way where we've been supporting people to sort of think differently about what's possible.
Awesome. Thank you all. So last question of this session. What gives you hope as you keep going on this anti-racist journey? What gives you hope?
What gives me hope are the children. Doing this work and implementing it into our curriculum and into our teaching staff, and walking into a classroom and hearing children saying or even saying, Lisa, I read that book, like My Skin. I walked in and a little child said, I read that book and I read it to 4 other children, and then they began to tell me what's in the book. And it's just seeing them do that. I even had a story where a parent came up to me and said, you've been really creating and really implementing like the real knowledge about where we get our skin tone from. And I even, alongside with one of our parents, we've created a skin tone Zito line, which is Play-Doh, but it's Zito, with books and questions that you can have and do along with your children. And so one of the children's parents said that they were at a family gathering, and the aunt says, wow, where did I get all these freckles from? And the child from our school began to tell them, and this aunt who's 30-something years old says, is that really where you get freckles? So what gives me hope is when I hear children now learning what we had to unlearn, because, you know, skin tone, it was just like, we were told, that's just what you look like. Never that, you know, comes from your parents. How far are you from the equator? Your ancestors. You know, I love to hear 3-year-olds try to say the word ancestors. So when I hear children really telling the truth, because once they know where you come from, then you can build on other conversations, gender, ability, inability. All these conversations come out of that whole conversation that we just started on those 3 things about skin tone. So it's the children that give me hope all the time.
Thank you, Lisa. Yes.
I'll share. I would say what gives me hope is really seeing when individuals are just willing, when they become more willing on their own to embrace the work. And when I start to see the conversations and the actions of individuals become like second nature, when people begin in our organization to, when they course correct themselves, or when we're in a space or a meeting and somebody else recognizes that a goal or something we've said might be excluding a certain group, or we might not be considering a more diverse perspective, and they are brave enough to mention that or hold it up in that space. I think that's what really gives me hope, and seeing some of the leaders within our organization who in the beginning we may have thought would have had the most difficult time embracing this work, seeing some of them be intentional and be proactive and start and having conversations with their staff and creating space and opportunity to hold up this work within their teams. Like, to me, that is what gives me the most hope, and to know that anybody can do this. Like, anybody, if they are willing, if they are willing to lean into the discomfort, if they're willing to receive input and feedback, anybody can do this, because I'm seeing that with the leaders in my organization.
Yes, such profound, like, we're all dynamic, whole humans that can grow and learn and change. and that what used to be the past doesn't have to be our future. Yes, gives me hope too.
Honestly, looking at the numbers of people here today, that is giving me some extra hope. Oh my gosh. Like, also the fact that to me, it's just about the vulnerability piece. Like, the minute that I laid down my stuff and I was able to really step into my place of vulnerability, that's what's been giving me the hope. And people have been responding. Like you said, Candace, like, we can all do it. I didn't know that I was going to be the one to do it, but I am, and here I am. You know, a year ago, you would have not seen me on this space. So if I can do it, you can do it.
I think for me, it's about the possibility of creating healthy workplaces and organizations where people can thrive. And I'm sure that people on this call have been in the opposite of that. I have too. And I feel really called to continue to help be a part of an organization that is committed to this work, both in service of those who we serve, so our ventures and our grantees who are doing the hard work every single day, but also for our staff and for those who show up to work every single day. So, and I feel hopeful that I have a team of 50 people who also believe in that and that we're doing the work.
Oh, yes. Thank you. I similarly feel hopeful because of the people around me that I'm kind of doing the work with. That resonates very deeply. Well, thank you all so much for sharing your wisdom, sharing your experiences, sharing your wins, but also your mistakes, and being so vulnerable and generous in everything that you've given us over this panel, this session. And thank you for continuously still leading and doing this work within your communities and within your organizations. So thank you to our amazing panelists.
Yes, thank you so much. And I'll just share that what's giving me hope is gatherings like this and getting to talk with you all as leaders and sharing all of your wisdom with our Embracing Equity community. And I popped in the chat here too that Rashi and we want to hear from you. So if you're in the audience right now, please email us because we want to hear from you. We want to hear your stories. We want to hear what you're needing at your organizations. And we can't wait to be able to partner with you as well. And now we're going to go ahead and launch our poll for the session. So just like all the other sessions, your feedback is so appreciated. It's such a gift. So please take a moment to complete the poll that Nicole, Dr. Evans, will be launching for us here shortly. And just thank you so much for joining us today and really inspired and hopeful kind of leaving this session. So thank you.
Don't leave us. Don't leave us. We've got something special after this session. Hopes and freedom dreaming. This was amazing. You really got to talk to leaders who are actually in the trenches. And so I love that. Hopefully you took something away from them. And then we're going to do an inspiring final session. We are at about 90% participation, so I'm going to show you the poll.
They'll call me freedom, just like a waving flag. When I get older, I will be stronger.